The Good Reading Podcast is brought to you by LuxuryRead, the monthly book subscription that pairs a new release book with a pampering gift delivered to your door. There are new books every month and 9 genres to choose from. Why not spoil yourself or give the gift of a LuxuryRead subscription today? Visit luxury.com.au to find out how.
Tuesday, 8th of September 2015. The only sound in the room is Pia's typing. The blood drains from Ollie's face and she sinks into the nearest chair before her legs buckle. The name Nicole Horowitz creates an instant file path in her brain to a slew of old images and news headlines. Nicole and her former housemates are in the same category as Azaria Chamberlain and the Beaumont children. Their case is an unsolved mystery firmly fixed in Australia's collective psyche, journalistic gum on the nation's shoe. Ollie has worked enough stories to know that some just have the X factor, the perfect mix of ingredients, a plot and characters that keep people wanting more. Try as the media overlords might, they just can't orchestrate that desired alchemy. Sometimes death simply falls flat. But the Housemate Homicide had been a newspaper editor's wet dream from the start, and despite Alexandra Rabboni's swift conviction, there had always been something off about the whole thing. It lacks the neatness of a clear motive. It lacks closure.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Good Reading Podcast. My name's Greg Dobbs. Sarah Bailey is the best-selling author of 3 works of crime fiction, including The Dark Lake, which won the Ned Kelly Award for Best First Fiction and the David Award for Best First Novel. The Dark Lake was followed by Into the Night in 2018 and then Where the Dead Go in 2019. All 3 feature Detective Sergeant Gemma Woodstock as their central character. Today I'm chatting to Sarah Bailey about her new book, The Housemate. Sarah, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, The Housemate revolves around a cold case murder, 9 years in the past. What's the attraction and the challenge of a cold case scenario?
Oh, I guess just unresolved outcomes. I think everybody dislikes when there's, something that's not been explained properly or a mystery that no one's ever been able to sort of understand. So I think for journalists and people that work in the police force in particular, it's a real rub for them and something that if they ever get the chance to revisit and sort of close, they will always be really, really keen to do that. So that's the situation that my main protagonist finds herself in.
And what sort of challenges does that present for you?
From a writing point of view, I guess there's a whole lot of elements to the crime story that have to sort of be explained, and also you have to explain why it was unresolved at the time. So it's sort of a layered, perhaps more of a layered crime to create. I think I set the book in relatively current times, but the actual crime that is being delved back into was, as you say, 9 years earlier, so 2005. So, that sort of time frame, there was a lot less technology around. So some of the grunt work, I guess, from a procedural point of view and an investigative point of view is a little bit more manual and a little bit more luck-based. So, yeah, Ollie finds herself revisiting the case, but of course also revisiting her past as a part of that investigation.
So The Housemate is your first novel since the 3 books in the Gemma Woodstock series, but The Housemate introduces this new character, Oli Groves, an investigative journalist. How do you approach creating a new character when Gemma Woodstock has been so well established in your previous 3 works?
Probably with a fair amount of trepidation, I think. I definitely took my time in landing on who Ollie was. I started writing the book in first person, and I think because the Gemma Woodstock books are written in first person, I found that quite challenging, and I couldn't quite wrestle my way out of Gemma's psyche. So once I switched to third person, which was probably after I'd written around 20% of the book, I found it much easier. I think that perspective helped me be a little bit more observational with Ollie and see her in a slightly different way. But yeah, she's very different from Gemma. There are obviously similarities. They're both really determined and both relatively assertive in their own way, but definitely have weaknesses too. So hopefully both complicated characters in a way that makes reading crime fiction fun. But yeah, I really enjoyed in the end having a different person to be the vehicle for this story. And I don't think Gemma was the right vehicle for this story. And I'm really glad that Oli was sort of the result of tackling something new. It was nice to write a new character.
Was it difficult to avoid infusing a little bit of Gemma into Oli?
At times it was. I think the thing that was helpful was that their scenarios were completely different. So their lifestyles and what they're sort of dealing with and their history made them different people. They both have pretty sort of traumatic pasts in different ways. So I think, they are probably what you would call people that are carrying around a lot of baggage. So there's similarities from that perspective, but the sort of issues that they were dealing with and what's in front of them day to day is quite different. So hopefully that comes through, but I think they're probably complementary characters.
Olive comes across as rather determined when it comes to her work. She's an investigative journalist, as we've said, and so much so that at one point I think she says, sometimes making yourself part of the story is the best way to get the facts. Now that sort of suggests that she might be a little bit unscrupulous. Do you want her to be liked as a character?
Oh, this is such a tricky question because I love reading characters that I don't like. So in some ways, when I don't like them, I like them, if that makes sense, from a reading experience. Some of my favourite characters are ones that I suppose you wouldn't necessarily pick to be friends with in real life. So I think it's a bit of a tricky question to answer, but whether Oli's liked or is simply intriguing to read, I guess I don't mind as long as people enjoy the story and can understand why she makes certain decisions as a result of that sort of story and the situations that she finds herself in.
And of course, every good investigative reporter, journalist needs a sidekick. And to that end, you introduce Cooper Ng. So Cooper is, well, I guess a rather naive foil to Olive's hard-nosed journalist. Tell me about this character, Cooper Ng.
Yeah, so I love a sidekick. It's definitely a trope that I embrace wholeheartedly. I just think the dynamic that it allows you to play around with as a writer is really fun. And in this particular instance, Cooper represents the new breed of journalists coming up through the ranks. He's tech savvy. He's really quite fast in the way that he thinks. He's quite entrepreneurial, whereas Oli is far more traditional and sort of thinks that the profession needs to be respected, taken really sort of slowly and seriously. So they butt heads sort of right from the get-go. And I really like this dynamic because I think that in the world that we're in right now, we are wrestling with those two kind of concepts and those two approaches to all things in the world of work, particularly. My full-time job in advertising is sort of a youthful industry, I suppose, by nature. But I see every day sort of the changing nature of how people think, how people approach problem solving, how people approach managing people, interacting with people. So it's fascinating, I think, just to see that all play out. And I had a lot of fun in this particular book and that kind of journalistic environment in just showing the different ways and the struggles that Oli had with someone like Cooper that is just like a puppy dog. He's got so much excited energy about journalism, which she does in her own way, but that it just manifests completely differently.
And of course, this kind of friction, or it's almost like a duality, is one of the, I guess, sub-themes of the book. And there's this, as you said, between old and new in the media and communications landscape, things like digital versus print, podcast versus newspaper, the phone versus Twitter as a communication tool, and I guess in the broader sense, youth versus maturity, experience versus enthusiasm. And now these technologies and perspectives come quite naturally for Cooper, but they're often quite frustrating for Oli. How does that pan out in the book?
She just doesn't like this sense of everything being different or things not being done properly. And in her mind, proper journalism is when you go out and you do the grunt work and you write the article and you get it edited and that's all fact checked and that's the way that works. He's much looser and much more willing to sort of take chances, I suppose, and speculate. And he's very emotional as well, which I think she finds frustrating too. So it's definitely something that she's aware is hovering over her in general. She's probably feeling pretty insecure about her future career because she knows that the landscape's changing around her. And I think, unfortunately for Cooper, he happens to turn up and be a physical representation of that. So she sort of finds him frustrating because all of her insecurities come to the fore every time he speaks.
I kind of got a sense that this book is almost an expression of generational differences as well as that of the individual. Is that something you were thinking about as you wrote?
I think so. I mean, I'm not personally too frustrated about the changing landscape. I think I'm relatively adaptable, and as long as something makes sense to me, I'm pretty willing to give it a try. I think something I'm aware of in our world, the media and comms world at work, is very much that sense of what has value these days. I think that it was much easier when people used to go out and purchase a newspaper or watch a TV report, and that sort of made sense from a commercial sort of framework perspective. I think these days, with content being sort of so free or perceived to be free, it has muddied the water a little bit in regards to what has value and what people are willing to pay for. And I think that that is an interesting challenge for the media landscape to wrestle with over the coming years. Even podcasts, which are hugely popular now, and all kinds of online content, what people are willing to actually put their credit card on the line for is ever changing. And also the ownership that people feel towards platforms that they don't pay for fascinates me. So, when Twitter does an upgrade, people are outraged if they don't like the new format, but they don't pay for Twitter. So I find it really interesting that people have this really strong sense of ownership because they use these platforms constantly, but there's no financial exchange. So I just think all of those concepts are really interesting. And I think Oli represents, the old guard, and then Cooper represents someone who's willing to sort of just dive straight in and figure it out as he goes.
And if we can talk about your first three books again, The Dark Lake, Into the Night, and Where the Dead Go, they're all, I guess we describe them as police procedural thrillers in a general sense. In The Housemate, though, you've kind of jumped the fence into investigative reporter territory. What was the driving force behind that move?
Yeah, it's like a journo procedural, apparently. So, I think I really wanted to be a journalist when I was growing up. So I suppose it's probably a bit of a deep-seated desire that I've finally sort of been able to fulfill in my own way. I did spend a bit of time with a few journalists that were kind enough to let me tag along on their day at work, which was great. And I just I felt that a journalist has that same dogged determination as most detectives do, where they're trying to get to the bottom of a case. And they see things perhaps from a slightly different angle because they're not just worried about solving the crime itself. They're interested in how the story and the narrative is going to be brought to life. And that is an interesting layer to put over the top of the truth. There's no journalist in the world that I think can claim to be completely devoid of understanding that something is going to be read and understood in a certain way. Their personal brand also comes into it, so they need to make sure that they feel that what they're saying is reflecting the kind of person they want to be deemed to be. So it's quite complex. I think in a way there's more ego involved for a journalist than a detective, although, there's obviously competitiveness in the police force as well. So, yeah, I really liked the idea of tackling a case, a murder mystery, but having the layers of the story having a life of its own, and sort of how that plays out, I think is just, really fascinating to me. So hopefully interesting to other people too.
Definitely the characters are very interesting in the scenario too. I wondered though, do you set out with a plan for your stories, or do you just let the characters lead the way?
Well, I actually found the synopsis that I had pitched to my publisher, Allen and Unwin, last week when I was cleaning out some files in my room. And that story has changed quite a lot. It's actually probably also the first time that I've done a synopsis. So I think I sort of felt that I needed to do that for that phase of the approach that we were talking to the publisher about. But it's definitely changed quite a bit. There's elements that are familiar. So Oli was still the main character, and there was a story that centered around three housemates. But a lot of the nuts and bolts of the story has changed. So it definitely changes as I go. I think the more you write, the more your brain starts to connect the dots as you go. Like I've always sort of said, for me, the best way to write is to write, because it's almost like something kicks in with your subconscious and the story starts to sort of plot itself out in front of you once you get those words down. So I tend to have a rough plan. I think with all of my books, I've had a strong premise and a rough plan, and definitely some characters that I know will be the best place to bring the story to life. But the actual procedures, I suppose, the sort of what happens and when and in what order, that changes up until the last minute.
So you kind of solve as you go, would you say?
Absolutely. I have definitely had moments of looking at a wall of Post-it notes and scribbles, and I'm writing a scene where my character is looking at a wall of Post-it notes and scribbles, and I feel an incredible connection to the character trying to solve a case. So I think particularly with crime, but probably with all books, there's an element of nutting it out as you go. And yeah, when you're writing an actual crime book, it's quite an interesting parallel.
Well, when you speak of Post-it notes, it makes me think you're more like Oli Groves than Cooper.
This is probably true, although I think Ollie's more stubborn about change than I am. I just sort of have to get on the bandwagon because there's, so many changes in my industry sort of almost every day. But yes, I do like a pen and a paper and a notebook, and I like a to-do list and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, bit of a Luddite, I guess.
And my final question to you is, have you ever lived in a share house with 3 housemates of this type?
Well, not of this type, and I won't give away why. That's definitely something that I wouldn't be keen to have been involved in. But yes, I've lived in share houses, and I have had a couple of my friends sort of say, is this based on anything in real life? And I'm like, no, it's absolutely fiction. But yeah, I think the dynamic of a share house, just like the dynamic of an office, is super interesting. You live with people that sometimes you don't know that well, or even if you do know them quite well, do you know them as well as you thought, becomes the question. So yeah, really interesting dynamic to explore in a crime book. And hopefully these 3 characters people find interesting to read about.
It's been great to talk to you, Sarah, and thanks for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Oh, thanks very much for your time.
I've been talking to Sarah Bailey about her new book, The Housemate. It's published by Allen & Unwin and is available at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. This Good Reading Podcast was brought to you by LuxuryRead. Why not spoil yourself or give the gift of a LuxuryRead subscription today? Visit luxuryread.com.au to find out how.